Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. One of the cool things about working with people one-on-one with the interview and helping them as they go through this is that I recognize the questions that students are asking. And one thing that I did want to talk about that maybe isn't clear or isn't inherent, that you should have questions prepared not just for the residency director, but also for the residents individually. And you should know a little bit about their research. You should have an idea of what posters they're doing, certainly their names and interests and things like that. And I'm not saying that you have to memorize everything about them, but you should have questions for both. And they're going to differ, obviously. And what I wanted to do was go over those a little bit. And some of them can be asked to the director, some to the student, and some to both. So one of the big things is when you look at the website, you see that you have like this menu. You have the core rotations and then the elective rotations. But let's say everybody wants a particular elective rotation. How does that work? And have they been successful in getting them? So maybe one person has to do it early, one person has to do it late. The reason it really matters is that if you're going to PGY2 and you're going to, let's say, pediatric PGY2, it doesn't do you a lot of good to get the peds rotations in the spring. You really need them in the fall before you can early commit. So that you can say, yes, well, I've been in the peds rotation. I definitely like peds, and I've done the NICU as well. Accept me for the PGY2 or whatever. So the first thing you want to know is, how does that work? And, how have the residents been successful? So if you're interviewing RPD and residents in two different rooms, you can ask them separately because you can ask them in a different way. The RPD, you can ask, how does that scheduling work? Does somebody get to pick first and then the next person gets to pick their first and so forth? And then the residents, you can ask them, are you satisfied with being able to get the elective rotations that you needed when you needed them? It's not just getting them. It's getting them when you need them as you're looking towards your goals in PGY2. And what you hope for is a group of residents that have different interests. So what I would do if I was an RPD, and let's say I have 5 PGY2s available in 10 spots, is you could ideally get 2 students that were interested in peds, 2 that were interested in critical care, 2 that were interested in cardio, and so forth, so that you have some bit of competition as you're going towards early commit, but also that you don't have 10 people that want critical care, which kind of overwhelms the rotations, and that you have this very balanced group. The second, your interest as you get into the PGY1 may change. I remember talking to Key Gales, and he was adamant about ambulatory care, internal medicine, I think, and then moved on to ID. And that change is a big deal, because if your rotations are set in stone from the beginning, you decide that you're interested in something else, maybe an early rotation you had in your PGY1, then that's an issue. So what kind of flexibility are they going to have when it comes to working with you on those types of things? You also want to know what kind of research are they doing, and does that really fit with what you're interested in? Yes, I mean, to some extent, research is research. You learn how to do it. You get to do your own research on your own dime, on your own time. But I think that it's important that if you're going to fit, that you maybe have some background in the research they're doing. So the easiest fit is the peds, where you're at a children's hospital and you have peds research in your background and things like that. But sometimes it's quite disparate, where you're doing research just to learn how to do it, and that was just the opportunity. So you do whatever the research or whatever direction the professor you're working with is, or the PhD that you might have been working with was working in, or maybe you're working in something completely different. Also, what kind of things are they working on in terms of maybe the EHR or working with interprofessionally and those kinds of things? And these are really interesting. I mean, this is genuine curiosity, and when you express genuine curiosity, and those conversations kind of flow. And I understand that to some extent it's a bit stilted as you're doing these Zoom calls with other people on the Zoom call. You don't want to interrupt them. You don't want to talk over them. But at the same time, you want to get an idea of the things that they're doing and the things that you would like to do. And I think that that's really a great way to do it. When you're talking about ambulatory care and the transitions of care, what you really want to know also is this something they hand off to pharmacy and trust pharmacy 100%? Is this something that nursing does? Is the pharmacist's opinion and recommendations, are they accepted? And yeah, I get it. And some days it's a victory to get one recommendation accepted. But what you want to know is what kind of environment is it? Is it a culture where you are not going to be able to really make recommendations to the physicians and other health professionals? Now, just because you can't make them to the attending doesn't mean necessarily that the medical students or early medical residents are not going to be very interested in what you have to say, as they're kind of trying to figure things out. Remember, in July, they're new doctors, and they certainly would like to have you as a partner, as someone that can help them if you have that particular expertise. You also want to make sure that residents have good jobs afterwards. And while you can ask the current residents what they're planning to do, you can, if it's not already on the website, make sure it's not already on the website, or you can expand on it. You can ask, well, where are the residents going? Are they getting PGY2s at a good rate? You can look up, how well someone from a certain school gets PGY2, but you can't necessarily look for a person. And what you can do is you can maybe look past residents, and maybe you'll have to do a kind of a LinkedIn search, do a little bit of homework. But what you want to know is, well, after this residency, is there a job for me here? And if there's not a job for me here, is there a good match or opportunities for jobs in the future? When a place hires their own, sometimes it has to do a lot with geography. It's kind of a place no one wants to live, or the people that live there are already from there, and so they're going to stay there. And that's one thing. But what we really want to know is, do they hire their own? Or is this just a one-off, something that they do that helps the hospital, that helps them, so forth. What also you would really want to know is, what are the things they really don't necessarily like about the program? And it's not that you want to go down this negative road. What you want to know is, there's many, many positive things, but if there's something that you would want to work on, or maybe even me work on if I were to be accepted here, what's one thing that you would want to maybe advance and improve, something like that. If you feel really comfortable, this one question, which EO Fire uses as its intro question, and I think it's one of the reasons EO Fire is such a popular podcast, because what is the worst failure you've had, or the worst mistake you've made? And this is kind of a comfort zone thing. You really have to be comfortable to ask this one. But if you want to get someone talking, you ask them about their worst failure. And that really, really sparks a conversation. I think it allows you, though, especially if you're asked the question, to talk about one of your biggest wins. And that's how I would frame it. Usually the biggest win is preceded by the biggest fail. What is one thing that maybe was one of the worst failures that you've had, and how did you come back from it? And what you're really trying to do is, you're not trying to put them on a spot and make them feel bad or something like that. What you're trying to do is find out, well, what kind of resilience do you have? What kind of example are you going to be? If you're learning from someone that's never failed, that's not much learning. So it's a little bit of a risk, but it absolutely will start a conversation. I guess the kind of blanket statement you could ask is, what do you look for as you're kind of looking for your top characteristics of a resident? So you can ask the blanket statement, but what might also be a good refining of that question is to say, if you were to pick two qualities that are absolutely inherent in the resident that's coming in, what would those be? And you can compliment the current residents, like, oh, I see that they definitely have that. And they might. And then you can be genuine about it. You want to be genuine about it. But you really want to know, as I'm ranking you guys, are the things that you really, really care about the things that I offer? And if not, then maybe that ranking goes a little bit lower than another site. And that's kind of the direction I would go with the residency program director. But when you talk about the current resident, what you want to first know is, what would you do differently, or what surprised you when you came in? Because I've heard this over and over again, you can't prepare for residency in the way that you'd like to. That is, you can do your APPEs, but nothing really prepares you for it. It's just so different than anything you've done, or certainly at a level that you might not have done. And when you come to this interview, they'll have done a little bit of June, July, August, September, October, November, December, now January. And so they've had half of a residency. And you can ask them, so looking back on your first 6 months, how would you maybe have scheduled it differently, prepared for it differently? What things might you have done differently? And one thing I hear a lot is, I would have spent less time at the residency, which may seem counterintuitive. But what they're saying is, I let myself burn myself out. The opportunities to take weekends off were there, and I didn't take them. And I thought that I was doing good by doing that. But eventually it kind of suffered, and I started to burn out, and then I took them. And so I wish I had done that earlier. Maybe I'd wish I'd leaned into my fellow residents a little bit quicker. I remember talking to the two residents at Inova, and as soon as one did one rotation, one did the other, that would be a way that they could connect and they could support each other. You can also ask them about their future goals and how that's going. There's a rule in grad school that you never ask somebody about their research or when they're going to graduate, and it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, sort of real, because it's hard. And what you do want to know is, what direction were you thinking about, and how are those going, and are they responsive to what you're doing? I would also ask them which was their favorite of the core and which was the favorite of the elective rotations. Both of those are really, really a way to learn about the resident who's currently there, because they might be going in that direction. So they might have ambulatory care as their favorite, or ID as their favorite, but then have an elective that doesn't match with that. So if someone says, well, ID was my favorite, and then antimicrobial stewardship was my favorite elective, well, those kind of go together. But then when you hear something like peds was my favorite, and then administration was my favorite elective, and you're like, whoa, who wants to be an administrator? Well, I actually would enjoy it. But those are a little bit different. So now you're looking at, okay, so you're thinking about maybe being in management, and you get to learn a little bit more about them. You also want to know what they're doing outside the residency. And I've seen a lot of these YouTube videos, and the students are talking about how we always hang out together and we do stuff after together. And is that true? I don't know. But you do want to know that, is there good rapport between them? Because they're going to be similar. If the residency match process does what it's supposed to, there's going to be some homogeneity between residents, but also some diversity. And I'm not talking about racial and gender diversity. I'm talking more about just having some bit of interests that are a little bit different, but do they go out together afterwards, depending on the state and what you can and can't do. And then, what would they not just do differently in terms of their path as they were going through the residency, but is there anything that they kind of wish the residency had that they're working to add or something like that. So I remember a number of students who wanted to go into ambulatory care PGY2. There was no ambulatory care rotation, and they kind of assembled them out of kind of a transitions of care and working with discharge and those types of things. What is it that maybe we could change for the better, and what's your role in it and things like that? And this might seem a little bit weird to ask, but they would actually, I would appreciate it if you asked me this question. But do you have any guidance for me? You could ask the RPD, you could ask the residents, but what guidance would you have for me? You've gotten to know me a little bit. We've talked a little bit. What guidance would you have for me in terms of next steps for this site? And it might come out as a pop song. Listen to your heart, and it might come out as real good advice about one or two things that you may not have thought of. So the number one rule here with these questions is to be genuine. Don't ask questions that are on the website, things that you're genuinely interested in, and make sure to have them for the RPD and the resident, because you don't want to put either of them in the cold. You want to engage with both of them in meaningful conversation. And one that you may kind of throw in there is to actually ask a fellow applicant. And it's a little bit weird, but if there's something that they talk about, like, I like peds, you like peds, oh, did you go to children's as well? And you can kind of get some rapport there. But be careful not to go too far down that road, so it takes away from the focus of this residency site rather than making friends with the others. But it's not verboten to do that. So, but to sum up, make sure you have questions for the residents, for the residency program director, and that you write a couple of them down before your interview, and that you're taking notes through the interview to not only show your interest, but to make those questions genuine and something that would be valuable as you're trying to figure out the ranking. Because again, there's no offer at the end of this. There's no offer in a couple weeks. It's just, thank you very much. We'll rank you later, and you'll rank them later. Just one more thing about the courses as I'm going through this. So there is a 3 hour, 3 hours of videos explaining the point system and interviews and things like that. Then the email support and the interview. As those of you are realizing that you're not going to get an interview, you can kind of jump ahead of things. And I can look at your CV, I can look at your LOI and say, yeah, I can improve this, or maybe I can't. Maybe it wasn't the LOI, maybe it wasn't the CV, maybe it was your recommendations. It's expected that all your recommendations will be highly recommend, and recommend is a red flag, and then do not recommend, obviously, it's buyer beware. So as you're kind of looking at what help you need from me, if you're thinking phase 2, the reason you redo your CV isn't just to improve your CV, but also to look for opportunities to do something between now and the time for phase 2, which is coming here in a month and a half. Because if you didn't get an interview, and you might have just done I only have money for 4 sites, so I'm only going to apply to 4 sites. And Lux Pharmacist did that, and she said, as I kind of looked at it later, I thought, I probably would have driven a little further if you told me I wasn't going to get any of those 4. And then she's done great, and then has recently been on the cover of Pharmacy Today. I definitely would have me look at it at least, so I can, kind of give you some general feedback on the CV, like, this is, what's maybe missing in terms of the rubric. And then in terms of the letter of intent, it takes me literally 30 seconds to know where that one would stand and rank. But if you're seeing that maybe you're getting ghosted, or maybe you're only going to have one interview, and you're not sure if that's really a strong thing, then you may want to start this process now. Not really, certainly for the phase 2 application, but also that when you write that letter of intent and you realize that you aren't matching, what that's kind of feedback on also is that maybe you're not matching. You're like, that's really dumb. That's ridiculous. Well, what I'm saying is that they're giving you feedback that what you are saying and what you have are different things. So sometimes someone will apply to a strong acute care residency, but their CV screams ambulatory care and community. And they want to move over to acute care, but they don't have the experience to do it. So what you really need to do is, okay, well, let me look now and say, okay, well, maybe the next step is actually a dispensing hospital job, and then move on to having at least worked in a hospital before I go into that acute care thing or whatever it is. So when I talk about the CV, I'm really talking about figuring out what we can improve, what other things we can add. And you can just email me at tonythepharmacist@gmail.com. Just email your CV and I can look at it and maybe see if there's some clear issues with it. And then the LOI, to be more reflective, and to, if you use the templates, one, obviously it's not good to have a generic LOI with the templates and so forth, but you haven't done the most important thing, which is really reflect on what is meaningful to you. And that's going to come out in the interview, or that's going to come out that you just didn't really look at your own CV. You didn't look at your own path and see, well, you've got all these leadership positions, but you have absolutely no research experience and no acute care clinical experience, but you're applying for an acute care clinical position. So it's a mismatch. You probably should have been applying for managed care or community or administrative or something like that. And so what we want to do is we want to just be honest and say, oh, well, it wasn't anything they didn't like about me. It was just that my story didn't gel. What successful match applicants are, the LOI says this is what I want to do, the CV shows that this is what I've done, and much of it is towards what I want to do, and the recommendations say, yeah, this person is really good at what they want to do or what they're going to do. And so it's kind of up to you what you feel like you need help with the most or first, but I can help with the LOI, I can help with the CV, or I can help with the interview process as someone in your corner to help you out. Okay, well, email me, tonythepharmacist@gmail.com, if you have questions, or you can just sign up for the course and then give me an email and let me know where you're at in the process. But, regrettably, there are 1,500 students that will, or more, with this year, who will not be getting an interview, and who need some guidance and need to know what their next steps are. And you can just email me and ask me, well, what is my next step? And we can kind of go from there.